Joining us now is Ryan Clancy. He is the chief strategist of the No Labels Group. Ryan, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Ryan, so why don't we just get to the specifics here? What are your group's plans for the 2024 election? Lots of consternation around it, so get specific with us.
Indeed. Yeah, so we've been working for over a year to get ballot access in states across the country to create the opening to nominate a unity ticket potentially next year.
There's a lot of concern from the Democratic side that your group, if you run a third-party candidate, could serve as a spoiler. The idea being here that Donald Trump supporters are largely locked in, that it's the Biden, pro-Biden, anti-Trump coalition that could potentially be split by your effort. Now, your Democratic co-chair, Dr. Ben Chavis, recently addressed this. He said, no labels is not and will not be a spoiler in favor of Donald Trump, going on to say, if we find the polls are changed and Joe Biden is way, way out ahead, then no labels will stand down. So can you explain that? Because that was a little confusing to me, because it seems to me like the spoiler potential would be greater if the polls are closer versus if the polls are far apart.
Sure. So from the beginning, there's been two bars that we have to clear to nominate a ticket. One is the two major party nominees need to be considered bad enough in the view of the public, and a potential alternative ticket needs to be considered good enough that it could win outright in the Electoral College. Obviously, if Biden were holding a big lead, that would probably close off the path for an independent ticket. And this is where a lot of what we've done has been so mischaracterized. You see comparisons to Jill Stein or Nader or something like that. We will never nominate a ticket like that. Nobody wants to fuel a protest candidacy.
So if it's not a protest candidacy, let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen, guys, please. The New York Times tear sheet. The alarm by Democrats that we have seen Joe Manchin being held up as a potential at the top of the list here for a ticket. Why do you see this as you called it, a unity ticket? Why is the country crying out for a Joe Manchin presidency, if you will, or a like-minded politician?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that they're crying out for Manchin or anybody else. What I know they're crying out for, and which you both know they're crying out for, is something different than what they're almost certainly going to get. So you've all seen the polls. 2/3 or more people do not want a rematch of the 2020 election. And yet our system has absolutely no way to adjust to that. So we're in this position now where the major forces in both parties are basically saying to 2/3 of the country, tough luck. You're gonna have this election, even if you don't like it. And in the end, we don't even care if you like our candidate, as long as you hate the candidate on the other side more. We know you'll come home to us, and we just feel like the country can do a lot better than that.
Sure. I mean, we certainly do agree with that. However, the specifics really matter, because a lot of the people that are frustrated with Joe Biden, for example, they are more of the Cornel West or Marianne Williamson or Jill Stein view, where they're disappointed that Biden hasn't done more on climate. They're disappointed that Biden has broken his promises with regard to the PRO Act or with regard to the minimum wage. They would like for him to have moved further to the left on a variety of issues. So can you get specific about what your complaints specifically with Joe Biden are, and how your theoretical candidate would reflect a different policy valence than what the Biden administration, which I view as very centrist and very moderate, which is you guys' brand, what they've put forward?
So this is something that we've been very clear about since the beginning, which is we are not doing this because of subjective judgment about how good or bad Biden is, or a judgment about Trump. What we're doing is something that nobody else in the political system seems to be doing, which is actually just responding to what the public clearly wants. Now, they have obviously different reasons for not liking Trump right now or not liking Biden. But the one thing we can anchor in is that they want a better choice. And in our view, having the ballot, and in July, we're actually going to be putting out some ideas. What that's going to finally do for the first time in a long time is there's this huge common sense majority in this country that gets ignored, that both parties don't feel like they have to be accountable to. And this is actually going to force them to be accountable to them. And if in the end they put forward candidates or platforms that make it so there's no room for a no labels ticket because they're appealing to the vast majority, great. We'll stand down and double down on the work we've been doing in Congress for over a decade.
So, Ryan, something I'm interested in is why not any of the current people in the field? As Krystal mentioned, Cornel West, Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr., he's mounting a very serious threat right now to the Biden White House, enough so that they've gotten the same Times coverage that you guys have over there. So why not back somebody who is in the race and is actually primarying Joe Biden actively as we speak?
Because we're not working to undermine Biden. We're not working to intervene in the Republican primary. That's the problem. No Label's ability to influence either party primary is very limited. As you know, turnout there is pretty narrow. It's often controlled by a lot of party officials in the states. We're just going to bypass the primaries entirely. And here's why that's so important. And I know we haven't talked about issues much, but all these issues that we know the public wants solved, and we even know the outlines of what that could look like. You look at issues like immigration or education. We know why those issues can't be solved. It's because people on both sides, the leaders in both parties, are deathly afraid of crossing their primary voters and the interest groups that have the most power in the primaries. So if you start to look at issues and you wonder, why can't we have sensible gun safety legislation, even though 80% of the country wants it? It's because of the influence in the gun lobby on the right. Why can't we have school choice? Why do we force kids into failing schools year after year? It's because of the influence of the teachers' unions on the left. And you see that on issue after issue.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more policy specifics, because I think that's important. I mean, first of all, public education, traditional public education, public schools, is very broadly supported by the public. So I would dispute the fact that that's some sort of common sense majority and that that's not, that that's entirely driven by union support. But put, guys, up on the screen G4, which shows the views of Americans with regard to taxation. So you have huge majorities. I'm talking 83% of Americans who say they're worried corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes. Similar vast majorities, 82%, say that they're concerned the wealthy do not pay their fair share of taxes. So is taxing the wealthy part of your mainstream agenda, given that it has 80% plus support among the American people, both Republicans and Democrats?
So we've got a huge section on the budget, which of course is completely out of control right now. And in our policy agenda that we're putting out shortly after July 4th, we make very clear that for any progress to be made on the budget, everything has to be on the table. And that includes taxes, and that includes spending. There is no way to cut your way out of this, to tax your way out of this. Both parties are going to have to come to the table and give things that they haven't wanted to give up until now. Or we're just going to keep having these deficits, which are completely unsustainable.
So your party would commit to increasing taxes on the wealthy, because there have been other instances where No Labels has, teamed up with Krystal and Saagar to make sure, for example, the carried interest loophole doesn't get closed, to make sure that pharmaceutical companies don't have to negotiate with the federal government in terms of prescription drug prices. So do you all commit to the idea, based on this common sense majority of 83%, that the wealthy should pay more in taxes?
Well, wait, Krystal, I want to correct the record there. So we never teamed up with Krystal and Saagar to knock down the carried interest loophole or get rid of prescription drug negotiations. In fact, one of the things you'll see, again, in our agenda coming out in July is we call for more prescription drug negotiations, because that's what the public told us they wanted in this mega poll we did of 26,000 people. I think what you're referring to with Senator Sinema, if you go back to a couple of years, yes, No Labels did not support the partisan passage of the full Build Back Better bill, in the same way we didn't support the passage of the Trump tax cuts.
Well, but let me ask you about that, because the individual elements of the Build Back Better bill were extremely popular, including closing the carried interest loophole, including affordable childcare, including universal pre-K. Each of these things was supported by an overwhelming majority of Americans. So it very much seemed like there was a common sense majority in favor of each of those elements. So then why would you oppose that?
Well, there's two things. First of all, it's very easy to poll individual ideas in isolation. So if you ask people, do you want universal childcare? Sure, sounds good. Do you want prescription drug pricing? Sure, sounds good. Do you want climate subsidy? Sure, sounds good. The problem is, if you look at those things in their totality and what that would cost, then you can also ask the public, how do you feel about our fiscal situation? Do you think Washington needs to be doing less spending? Do you think they need to be bringing our budget under control? And they'll tell you, yes, that's a huge priority for them. So it's not something you can sort of look at in isolation. Yeah, they like some of these ideas, but when you pulled it all together, what you saw is a $5 trillion package that was going to be passed with one party support. And it's the same reason, as I said, we didn't support the Trump tax cuts, because when you do huge policy like that, it doesn't last until 4 years later, the other party comes in, they try to undo it.
Yeah, so it's a political case, I understand that you're making here. So why do you think that your third-party candidacy would be able to solve that? Like, let's say even if you do win the presidency, you're still going to have a partisan Congress of which that you best described. As in, why is this run kind of the Band-Aid that you think it is to the major structural problems that you're laying out?
Because it all comes back to, who do politicians think they're accountable to? And the problem is whether you're talking about the president, whether you're talking about House or Senate leaders, they only really care about what their primary voters think. That's all they worry about. The narrow slice of voters who are going to put them over the top in their elections, and then they get to the general and they don't really have to worry about that anymore. So here's how that manifests on an issue like immigration. You look at our polling, 80% of people would get behind a compromise that, one, made significant investments in border security, but two, provided a path to citizenship for the dreamers. Why can't we have that? Well, here's why. Because if you're in the Democratic Party today and you're for any kind of border security, you get accused by your base of wanting to put kids in cages. And if you're a Republican who's for anything other than deporting everybody, then, well, you're for amnesty. And that's why we can never get anything done on these issues.
But Ryan, let me ask you though, because AOC is not president, and Ilhan Omar and Bernie Sanders, they're not president. Joe Biden is president, and he has maintained actually a lot of the Trump immigration policies. And by the way, Democrats have put forward legislation which does basically what you suggest: pathway to citizenship, increased dollars for border security. So I'm just confused, frankly, why Joe Biden isn't your guy. Look, he's not my guy. I'm ideologically to the left of him. I think he's failed on any number of promises to the working class. But not only, put it on immigration, as I laid out, he passed an infrastructure bill with bipartisan support. He passed the CHIPS Act with bipartisan support. He passed the Inflation Reduction Act. He got that through. He was able to do the PACT Act to help toxic burn victims from our men and women serving overseas. So he's like fetishizes bipartisanship. That's his whole thing. So do you see him, what is your specific grievance with him, number one? And number two, do you see him as equally sort of extreme in your language as Donald Trump is?
No. So, and our co-chairs put out a statement to this effect. Dr. Ben Chavis, Joe Lieberman, headline was, Donald Trump should never again be president. So we don't have any illusions about an equivalency between the two of them. But again, Krystal, I come back to this. If you look at where the public is at, why is President Biden's approval rating is under 30% among independents? It was over 60 when he was inaugurated. So obviously something has happened between then and now. And in our view, when we look at our polling, some of that is he probably hasn't governed as the unifier that the public expected.
Well, actually, I mean, when his approval ratings were the highest, were at the beginning of his administration when he was doing the most and taking the most, with the stimulus at the beginning, dealing with the end of the pandemic, cutting checks to American citizens. That's when his approval rating was the highest. When he has, sort of taken a step back and obsessed over bipartisanship and dug in his heels and not done a whole lot, that's when his approval rating falls off a cliff. So the idea that the move is to the center, that there needs to be more like the bipartisan infrastructure deal type of stuff, well, they already did that. It clearly didn't give Biden much of a bump in the polls. So I would just dispute, I think we have a very large difference of opinion about the frustrations that the American people have with Joe Biden in particular. But the other piece, you've talked a lot about, the American people and what they support and what they're looking for and who politicians are responsive to. Your group reportedly has a lot of very large donors. A number of billionaires, including Harlan Crow, have been reported, and Steven Schwarzman have been reported as giving big money to your group. but you all won't disclose your donors so that people know what interest you might have at stake and what they might be signing up for if they do affiliate with your group. So will you commit to revealing your donors so that the American people can have transparency around what this third-party effort is about and who it is backed by?
So first, Krystal, a lot of the donors that have been reported that support no labels, they don't. I mean, I really don't know where they're getting the names from, including one of the ones.
Well, Harlan, I mean, we can. Can you just confirm or deny, the two of them so that we can have some more information? Because again, this is all based on what people are able to report out, rather than it would clear up the record if you just made all the donors public.
No, here's why we don't do that, and we never have. So we've been around for 13 years. We're not a political party. We're a C4 like AARP or League of Women Voters, and they don't support their donors either. Because the way this works today is a lot of the people that are attacking us, they sort of get behind the mantle of transparency and good government. They say, oh, just reveal all your donors. Of course, they don't reveal any of theirs. What they want to do is go through a donor list and just attack those people, all the people that support us on both sides, and then try to intimidate them to leave no labels. That's how the game works. We're not going to play it. If in the end we nominate a ticket, that ticket will have to disclose everything to the FEC just as any ticket would. So if you want to know what does no label stand for, I'd say look at two things. One, what we've done the last 13 years, and two, as I mentioned, in July, we'll be out with common sense. That's going to be our policy agenda. And I think you'll see in there a broadly appealing agenda that has nothing to do with pushing special interests, corporate interests. We do not take corporate money. So we feel very good about how we handle our donors.
All right, Ryan. Well, we appreciate you joining us, talking to us a little bit. Whenever it comes out in July, make sure you send it our way. Maybe we'll have a fun discussion again. I will say, though, I feel like all of you should have to disclose your donors. Not just you, but everybody else.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe we could talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.